Story 1. Back when I was in college, I used to house sit for this one family whenever they went on their annual vacations. I had done it for a couple of years, and while I had experienced some odd, unsettling things during my time there, the incident I am about to share is the one that finally made me stop. I was in my early 20s, juggling school and several side gigs to make ends meet. House sitting was one of those gigs, and this particular family paid me really well. They were heading out on a 2-week international trip and would be completely out of touch, no cell service. They made it clear that if anything serious happened, I should either call the police or reach out to their relatives. Now, you should know I had already been creeped out by their house on a few occasions before, but nothing had been terrifying enough to make me give up the job. Plus, the money was good, and I could really use it. One of my main responsibilities was taking care of their 4 cats, who were all incredibly sweet and well-behaved. Since I used to work at an animal shelter, I was very comfortable around animals and knew a lot about cat behavior. For the first few days, everything went smoothly. I stayed in the guest room, attended my classes, and used the house as a base since it was close enough to campus that I could walk to class and save money on parking and meals. It was convenient and easy, at least at first. But a few days in, things started to take a turn. My boyfriend at the time came over one evening with dinner to keep me company. He knew how much the house unnerved me, so his visits helped me feel less on edge. We hung out in the guest room, eating and watching television for a few hours before he said he needed to head home. Normally, he would stay over, but that night he had this strong feeling, almost like a warning, that he should not stay. He even tried to convince me to leave with him, saying he could not shake the bad vibe he was getting. By then, it was already around midnight. The truth is, I really did not want to leave. I had a complicated home life and barely got along with my parents. House sitting for this family was one of the few times I got to escape the stress at home. My sibling, who was my closest confidant, had already moved out because of the toxic environment, so home never felt the same anymore. I reassured my boyfriend that I would be fine. The house had a solid security system, the neighborhood was safe, and I had the cats to keep me company. Still, he looked uneasy as he left, but I locked the doors behind him and settled in for the night. That was when things started to go wrong. After securing all the doors and windows, I got into bed and relaxed. Out of nowhere, the television turned on by itself. I thought maybe I had bumped the remote, but when I looked, it was sitting untouched on the nightstand. I turned the television off, only for it to turn back on seconds later. This time, it flipped to a strange, static-filled screen, just black and white fuzz like it had no signal. That definitely was not normal. I turned it off again, and again, it turned itself back on. By now, I was starting to get genuinely freaked out. To put my mind at ease, I unplugged the television completely. I told myself it was probably some kind of wiring issue since the house had recently been renovated. Still, it was unsettling. I ended up grabbing a blanket and moving to the couch to sleep instead. The next day, my boyfriend came over again. When I told him what had happened, he shook his head and said I should have just gone home. He looked worried, but honestly, even after all that, I would rather deal with the creepy house than go back to my parents' place. That evening, we had dinner and watched a movie together in the living room. Now, to explain what happens next, you need to understand the layout of the house. It is built on 2 levels, the main floor, where you enter through the front door into the living room, and the basement below, which is technically the 2nd level. The house had a big living room, with another room on the lower level that was meant to be a spare bedroom. The stairs leading down to the basement were old, creaky, and downright eerie. I could never understand why the family did not replace them during the renovation. The cats, as usual, were everywhere. These 4 had personalities that made them independent but still affectionate in their own way. They liked being nearby, just not directly cuddled or held. They were mellow, preferring a quiet environment. Out of the 4, the youngest cat, about 3 years old, stood out because he was slightly smaller and more energetic than the others. That night, while my boyfriend and I were watching a movie, I suddenly felt a chill go down my spine. From the basement, we both heard what sounded unmistakably like a baby crying. My boyfriend froze, his face pale, and slowly turned to look at me as if silently asking if I heard it too. I instantly remembered something from my training at the animal shelter. Cats in distress sometimes make noises that sound a lot like a crying baby. My heart sank as I looked around the room, counting the cats. There were only 3. The youngest one was missing. Thinking it must have been him, I cautiously went downstairs to check. Sure enough, I found him stuck in the spare bedroom in the basement. Somehow, in his playful way, he had managed to close the door behind him. He must have been meowing in panic. I scooped him up, carried him upstairs, and put him back with the others. We resumed the movie, but it was not long before it was time to feed the cats. The family was very particular about their cat's feeding schedule. Their food station was in the kitchen, which was the only area in the house that connected directly to the basement. To explain the house layout better, the main entrance led straight into the living room, which split into 2 directions. One led to the kitchen, while the other led to 3 bedrooms, the master bedroom, the child's bedroom, and a spare bedroom. The kitchen was also the access point for both the basement and the living room. These cats had a routine when it came to meals. They loved being around people, but during and after eating, they would disappear to nap. Their favorite spots were the master bedroom or the teenager's room since those spaces smelled like their owners. This behavior was completely normal for them, and it happened every time I house sat. After dinner, we finished the movie and headed into the kitchen to clean up. The house was eerily quiet, with no sign of the cats. As we were tidying up, we suddenly heard the crying noise again, this time louder since we were closer to the basement. My boyfriend tensed up, visibly unsettled. I tried to stay calm and told him I would check it out, thinking it had to be the younger cat again. But as I made my way to the basement stairs, the crying sounded different. It was more frequent, higher-pitched, and almost desperate. I turned on the basement lights and called the cat's name as I crept down the creaky steps. With every step, the crying grew louder. My heart pounded in my chest as I searched every corner of the basement. I checked the spare room, peeked under the couch, and even looked in the small crevices. Nothing. The crying stopped the moment I reached the bottom of the stairs. It was dead silent. Fear gripped me, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I am not someone who exercises much, I do not jog, and I definitely do not run, but in that moment, I sprinted up those stairs like my life depended on it. When I burst back into the kitchen, I froze. My blood turned to ice as I saw the horrified look on my boyfriend's face. "All 4 cats, they're here," he said, his voice shaking. Sure enough, all 4 cats were gathered around him, sitting calmly near the kitchen island. He explained that as soon as I had gone downstairs, the cats had emerged simultaneously from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. That meant none of them had been in the basement at all. I stood there, frozen, staring at the cats and my boyfriend's pale face. None of the cats had been in the basement the entire time I was down there. My blood ran cold. Without saying a word, I quickly grabbed my things and shoved them into my backpack. My boyfriend, just as shaken, followed my lead, and we both left the house in silence. For the remainder of that week, I could not bring myself to stay there any longer. I only went back once a day to take care of the cats, feeding them and cleaning their litter box. I knew I was breaking their strict feeding schedule, but honestly, at that point, I did not care. On the last day, I did the bare minimum to wrap things up. I locked the house, placed the keys back in their hiding spot, and sent the family a polite message thanking them for the opportunity but letting them know I would not be available to house sit for them again. I never went back. I hated that house, and in hindsight, the strange experiences I had each year seemed to get worse. I should have stopped much sooner, but I was too focused on making ends meet. What haunted me most was the drive back to my parents' house that night. I called my sibling, needing to tell someone about what had happened. That was when they dropped a bombshell. They had also experienced something disturbing in that house when they visited me once. They admitted they had kept it to themselves because they knew I was house-sitting to save up money to eventually move out, and they did not want to scare me. Hearing that only made the whole thing feel even worse. To this day, I still think about that house and the things that happened there. I have no idea what was going on, but I am just glad I never had to go back. Story 2. My name is Jake, and I was 17 years old when this happened. I am 5 feet 3 inches tall. My friend Chris is 5 feet 8 inches, and my other friend Danny is 5 feet 7 inches. The date was March 19, 2016. At the time, I was dog-sitting for a family friend of my mom's to earn some extra money before heading off to college. It was a cool spring evening, and the house had this amazing sunroom that my friends and I loved to hang out in. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to turn a boring job into something fun, so I invited Chris and Danny over to spend the night. Chris and Danny were older than me. Chris was 23, and Danny was 22. They came over with a bottle of vodka, and we spent the first few hours just hanging out. We drank, smoked a little, shared stories, and laughed about random stuff. It was shaping up to be a chill night until something strange happened. The house phone started ringing. Normally, this would not have been a big deal, except for one thing: the phone was supposed to be disconnected. At first, we ignored it. We figured whoever was calling would leave a voicemail or try again in the morning. But the phone kept ringing, over and over. It was nearly midnight, and whoever it was just would not give up. Finally, Danny decided to pick up the phone. On the other end was a man who claimed to have the homeowner's wallet. He said he found it at a gas station about 25 minutes away and insisted that we come pick it up immediately. The whole thing felt off. The man kept pushing, saying it was urgent that we get the wallet right away. Danny tried to reason with him, explaining that we were not leaving the house that late at night. After a few minutes, Danny managed to get the guy to back off, promising we would deal with it in the morning. When the call ended, all three of us felt uneasy. Something about the whole situation just did not sit right. We grabbed the dog, a little guy named Buddy, and went into the back bedroom. We locked the door, shut the blinds, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Between the alcohol and the weed, our judgment was already a little off. We convinced ourselves that we were probably overreacting. Maybe the guy really did just want to return the wallet. Hours passed, and we tried to shake off the weird feeling. We drank some more, smoked a little, and eventually decided to put on a comedy movie to lighten the mood. We moved from the sunroom to the living room, popped in a DVD, and started making snacks. The sunroom was located between the kitchen and the living room, with a door that led out to the backyard pool. That door did not have a lock, but the door connecting the sunroom to the kitchen did. We left it open so Buddy could go outside if he needed to. Even though the phone call had freaked us out, we figured we were in a safe neighborhood, and Buddy would bark if anything weird happened. Time passed, and we were finally starting to relax. Chris and I sat on one couch, while Danny stretched out on another across the room. We were laughing at the movie, completely caught up in the moment. Then the clock struck 3 in the morning. That was when everything changed. Out of nowhere, I felt this overwhelming sense that someone was watching us. It was the kind of feeling that crawls up your spine and refuses to go away. I turned my head toward the kitchen, and that was when I saw it. A dark figure was crouched near the counter. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I watched as the figure reached up into one of the cabinets. My stomach dropped. There was someone in the house. I froze, barely able to breathe. Slowly, I nudged Chris with my elbow and whispered, "Chris, I think someone is in the house." Chris turned to look, and the second he saw the figure, he let out a blood-curdling scream. The figure whipped around, locking eyes with me. My whole body went numb. All I could see were his piercing blue eyes, glowing in the faint orange light of the kitchen lamp. The man was dressed in black from head to toe, hoodie, gloves, pants, shoes, and he wore a ski mask that covered everything but his eyes. Danny stood up, his voice shaking but loud enough to yell, "Get the hell out of here." To our horror, the man calmly closed the cabinet door and the figure turned his head sharply, and for a chilling moment, his eyes locked onto mine. I froze. Those piercing blue eyes, illuminated by the faint orange glow of a lamp under the cabinet, felt like they were staring straight into my soul. Everything else about him was cloaked in darkness, his black hoodie, pants, gloves, shoes, and a ski mask that covered all but his eyes. Chris must have noticed the fear on my face because he got up and followed my gaze. When he saw what Danny and I were looking at, he somehow found the courage to yell, "Get the hell out of here." To our utter disbelief, the man did not run. He did not panic. Instead, he calmly closed the cabinet door, straightened up, and walked out through the sunroom doors without saying a word. As soon as he was out of sight, panic set in. We bolted to the far corner of the living room, as far from the kitchen as we could get, and called 911. My hands were shaking so badly it was hard to hold the phone. The police arrived within 3 minutes. It felt like an eternity, but seeing those flashing lights through the window brought a small sense of relief. The officers moved quickly, sweeping through the house with flashlights and searching every room while we explained what had happened. They took our statements, asking for every detail we could remember, the phone call, the man's description, how he got into the house. After their search, they decided to station an officer outside for the rest of the night, just in case the man returned. We could not bear to stay. The fear of what might happen if he came back was too much. We grabbed Buddy, left everything else behind, the booze, the weed, even my car, and headed straight home. The next day, after the adrenaline wore off and we felt a little braver, we returned to the house. What we found made everything even more unsettling. Clothes had been pulled out of closets and scattered across the rooms. Crumbs were left by the doggy door, a clear sign that the intruder had been feeding Buddy to keep him quiet. Even now, years later, we have no idea who called us or who broke into that house. The police never found any leads, and the mystery remains unsolved. As for me, I have not stepped foot in that house since that night, and I do not think I ever will. Story 3. I am 28 years old and have loved animals for as long as I can remember. That passion naturally led me to a career involving animals. Right now, I work as a veterinary assistant. For a while, I also took on a side job offering to care for people's pets while they were away on vacation or business trips. My responsibilities ranged from looking after cats and dogs to taking care of birds. Sometimes, I even stayed at clients' homes for entire weekends, particularly for those who did not have family nearby to help out. Being a young woman already employed at a veterinary clinic, people generally felt comfortable with the idea of me staying in their homes. I was not just a stranger, my professional background was easy to find online. One day, I got a response to my ad from a man named Steve. He needed someone to care for his 20-something-year-old macaw and his cat for the weekend while he was out of town. Right off the bat, he offered me $300 for the job, which I thought was fair. Although I had experience handling birds, including macaws, this would be my first time watching one for a full weekend. Steve and I arranged to meet at his house. It was an ordinary corner lot in a typical suburban neighborhood. Steve was a short man who looked to be in his late 50s. He had salt and pepper hair and a matching mustache. He came across as very friendly, which did not surprise me, most animal lovers are. After introducing himself, he introduced me to his macaw, Charlie, and his cat, Milo. Charlie was enormous, but I was not intimidated since I had worked with large birds before. Steve explained Charlie's personality and quirks, including how to calm him down when he got noisy. The macaw kept repeating, "Daddy's home," every time Steve came near. Steve chuckled and told me Charlie said that whenever he saw him. The bird also had a few other phrases he would occasionally throw out, all short and to the point. Steve then gave me a rundown of how to clean Charlie's cage and explained Milo's feeding schedule. He asked me not to enter any of the upstairs bedrooms except for the guest room where I would be staying, which seemed perfectly reasonable. There was a bathroom next to the guest room, and he said I was welcome to help myself to anything in the kitchen. Since I am vegan, I brought my own food, so I did not need to raid his fridge. After we chatted for a while and he seemed comfortable with me, he handed over the house key and headed out. I watched through the window as he drove off into the night, leaving me with Charlie and Milo. It was already around 8 p.m. by then, so I figured there was not much to do except settle in. Charlie had plenty of food in his cage for the night, and Milo had already been fed, so I turned on the television in the living room, which was right next to Charlie's cage. The macaw stared at me quietly from his perch while Milo stayed out of sight somewhere in the house. After a couple of hours of watching TV and eating my simple dinner, I decided to call it a night. I left the bedroom door open as I slept, and at some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like 2 loud cracks. I sat up, listened for a moment, but heard nothing else, so I went back to sleep. With a big bird in the house, I figured occasional noises were normal. The next day went smoothly. I cleaned Milo's litter box, fed both pets, and let Charlie out of his cage for a while. The macaw perched on the back of the couch as I watched television. Steve had mentioned that Charlie and Milo usually ignored each other, so I did not have to worry about them getting into a scuffle. Later in the afternoon, I decided to go explore the area. I took a walk in the nearby park, video chatted with a couple of friends, and even drove around a bit before picking up dinner. By the time I got back to the house, it was around 7 p.m. The rest of the evening was peaceful. I spent time with the pets while eating my dinner and watching TV. Jeremy was supposed to come back late the next day, so I turned in early again. I slept with the door open, just like the night before. However, I was woken up once more. This time, it was the sound of the bedroom door closing. Groggy, I looked up and noticed that the door, which I had left wide open, was now shut. I tried to rationalize it. The windows were open, but the air was still, and there was no breeze strong enough to push the door closed. Something about it unsettled me. As I lay there processing this, I started to hear noises from downstairs. It sounded like Charlie moving in his cage and murmuring. Concerned, I got out of bed and made my way down the staircase to check on him. His voice grew clearer as I descended. When I reached the cage, I saw Charlie pacing back and forth, wide awake. Remembering what Steve had told me to do to calm him down, I grabbed a treat from the bag nearby. Just as I was about to hand it to him, Charlie suddenly said, "Daddy's home." That phrase sent a chill through me. It felt strange, even eerie, given the circumstances. I handed him the treat, and he quieted down, but the whole situation left me uneasy. I decided to head back to bed, leaving the door open again. Sometime later, maybe an hour, I woke up once more. This time, I did not hear anything specific, but as my eyes adjusted to the near-total darkness of the room, I noticed something that made my heart stop. A black shape was moving. It was in the middle of the room, slowly retreating toward the door. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear. I almost screamed, but before I could, the figure vanished into the hallway. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Was it a shadow? A hallucination? I grabbed my phone to use its flashlight, but when I turned on the screen, I saw a text message. It was from Steve, sent about an hour earlier. The message read, "If Charlie makes noise in the middle of the night, it is normal. Just ignore it. I stared at the message in disbelief, reading it over and over. The timestamp matched the time I had gone downstairs to give Charlie a treat. My stomach sank, and a wave of nausea hit me. That black figure I had just seen, what if it was not my imagination? I decided I could not stay there any longer. I turned on the bedside lamp and started packing my bag as fast as I could. I had not brought much with me, so it only took a few minutes. Grabbing my toiletries from the bathroom, I tried to stay quiet. The hallway was pitch black, and as I stepped out of the bathroom, I thought I heard the faintest noise coming from one of the other bedrooms. It sounded like movement, a soft, rhythmic rattling. Against my better judgment, I crept toward the sound, stopping outside what I guessed was the master bedroom. I pressed my ear to the door. The noise became clearer. It was the sound of a bed rocking. My heart raced as I realized someone was in there. Swallowing my fear, I knocked on the door. "Steve, are you in there?" I asked, my voice shaking. The sound stopped abruptly. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. "If you are in the house, I need to know right now before I leave." Still, no response. I had enough. I rushed downstairs, left the house key on the table, and walked out the door without looking back. As I drove home, my nerves were shot. I recorded a long voice message for Steve, telling him I was deeply disturbed and was seriously considering reporting him to the authorities for stalking or invading my privacy. I told him I wanted an explanation. Almost immediately, he called me 3 times in a row. Too shaken to answer, I ignored the calls. Then he texted me, apologizing and claiming his brother had unexpectedly come home that night. I knew it was a lie. Furious, I demanded he pay me for my services and promised not to escalate things further if he complied. He sent the money through Zelle, and I blocked his number as soon as the payment came through. The next day, as I unpacked my bag, I realized something was missing, an article of clothing that I was certain I had packed. The realization made my stomach churn, and I knew, deep down, that he had taken it. I have done my best to push this memory out of my mind. This is the first, and last, time I will recount this experience in such detail.